Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much. My name is Hudson. I'm Principal Civil Engineer here at Jubb in Plymouth. And today I just want to talk a bit about sustainable drainage in the sort of sector. What I'm going to touch on today is what is SUDS. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with what SUDS is as an acronym. It's very common today, but I'm going to just make sure we're all on the same page. And then discuss why we need it, why it's becoming more and more important in our design. Talking about the 4 pillars of SUDS, which is the sort of 4 building blocks on which the philosophy of SUDS kind of is based around. And then how SUDS can be a benefit to public realm schemes. I then want to talk to you, I'm sure you've heard a lot about the Armada Way regeneration scheme over the last day or so. So I'm going to touch on the sustainable drainage system within that new scheme. And then finally, some keys to successful delivery of SUDS in public realm spaces. So first and foremost, what is SUDS? Open up to the room, somebody shout it out. Sustainable urban drainage. So some of you may have said sustainable drainage, some of you sustainable urban drainage. So it started out life as sustainable urban drainage systems. We now tend to lean towards sustainable drainage systems. The U has got small. Fortunately, the first 2 letters are sustainable. Make that work. But the reason we dropped urban from that acronym was that it allows the philosophy of SUDS to apply to all drainage design, not just to urban environments. I think some people were leaning on it as, well, I'm building a new build in a greenfield site. It's not urban. Why do I need to do this? So the sustainable drainage system mantra applies to all drainage design. But what does it do? What does it mean? SUDS really is a way of mimicking natural drainage. We as human beings have a very good way of building places and making them habitable, but in doing that we often pave over soft landscaping, make it accessible, but also take away from the way that an area in a catchment would have drained before we got there. We also want to manage rainfall closer to the source, and what I mean by that is if you think back to the traditional way of draining a town, an area, however you want to look at it, even as far back as Bazalgette with his sewers in London, it was rainfall that lands on an area, get it away from where we live, get it away from the habited spaces as quickly as possible, and get it in a river or a stream or the sea. That obviously comes with issues because that isn't how natural drainage works. That's not how catchments are drained naturally. So we want to deal with rainfall where it lands or closer to where it lands and see it as a resource rather than a waste product almost. And finally, SUDS will also help us increase resilience of our drainage systems. We all know that our drainage systems are starting to get stretched due to changing climate and that kind of thing. So SUDS is a way of increasing resilience as well as improving other elements of public design, as we talk about here. So why do we need it? Obviously, the main reason we need SUDS is climate change. I wouldn't think of SUDS as the way that we're going to solve climate change. SUDS isn't going to save the world in that sense, but what SUDS does do is combat and sort of work with the fact that climate change is happening and help us deal with that. So extreme weather events are becoming far more common. The photos here are taken from Plymouth in as recently as August 2020. Those photos were taken, and that was an August day when 26 millimetres, over an inch of rain fell in a 5-hour period. And Plymouth City Council themselves said in a statement that, simply put, in quote, our sewer system do not have the capacity to deal with this kind of rainfall. So this is what we're dealing with, these kind of intense rainfall periods that are happening more and more frequently. But also, we've got to go from floods in August 2020, 2 years later, July was the driest July since 1935, and then we had a 9-month hosepipe ban in the southwest. So we're dealing with real swings of changing to the environment. As we know, urban areas are those areas that are increased risk. We've got high percentage of impermeable areas and therefore lower percentages of soft landscaping, which is going to drain water away from our habited areas much more quickly. So the 4 pillars of SUDS, they are water quantity, water quality, amenity and biodiversity. So water quantity was where it all began really. Water quantity is the fundamental sort of basis on on what we start at with drainage design. We want to reduce the amount of surface water that is entering into our sewers. When I say reduce, we're talking the peak flow rate, so how quickly it's getting into the sewer, and also the peak flow volume, so how much water is entering into our sewers. But since suds it started to evolve and become more and more commonplace in design, we now start to look at it as with these other elements, such as water quality. The water quantity almost comes hand in hand with that. If we reduce the amount of water going into our sewers, into our combined sewers, that will reduce the number of combined sewer overflow incidents. And as we saw yesterday out on the boat, Plymouth is an ocean city, and all of our sewers actually end up going there in overflow incidents. So we want to reduce the number of overflow incidents as much as we can to maintain that wonderful environment that we live in. And then with that, we can start to focus a bit more on amenity space and how that can open up spaces, and how sustainable drainage systems can actually be incorporated into amenity and provide better places for people to be. And of course, with that, on the other flip side of that coin is improved biodiversity along with that. So, benefits of SUDS. I'm going to start with the technical. I'm an engineer, so I like numbers, I like the quantifiable, and that is fundamentally what SUDS is. It's a technical method to reduce runoff rates and runoff volumes. The benefits of that, obviously, as I said, combined sewer overflow incidences will reduce and improves resilience to flooding and to drought events in urban environments. There's also social benefits, really talking about public realm space here, improved quality of space by incorporating features such as these rain gardens on Mill Bay Boulevard, creates a better space, it encourages more people to use the space, encourages more diversity and inclusion in our city and centres and urban environments. Ecological benefits, as I say, improved biodiversity and habitat variety. That's something that our cities often lack, is a variety of habitats and landscapes. So SUDS can help bring in things that weren't there before to improve that habitat and diversity within there. And finally, some economical benefits. Obviously, that's the money talks. So SUDS often has a decreased long-term management cost. It's easier to maintain more often than not, and also if there's, you're not draining into gullies, therefore they don't need cleaning as much, which reduces the demand on resource for public sector cleaning and that kind of thing. And also, of course, linking in with the social benefits, the increased footfall in areas leading to better commercial value of spaces. So how does that all reflect into what we're doing on Armada Way? So Jubb are working with Morgan Sindall Construction and Plymouth City Council on the regeneration of Armada Way. One of the main features of Armada Way, as you have seen, is the new central landscaping down the centre of the street. And so, as the civil engineers on the project, looking at it from a SUDS perspective, we wanted to make sure we had a nature-based SUDS solution, incorporating it into the landscape design, not seeing it as an element removed from that design, but really working hand in hand with the landscape. The main feature that does that is the rain gardens. We've got a series of interconnecting rain gardens which run down the flank of each side of Armada Way, and the paving areas, the footway areas on the east and west side of Armada Way are falling towards those rain gardens. These rain gardens are soil-filled troughs effectively in the ground, but with a gravel base with a perforated pipe sitting in that base. That pipe is then connecting to a new surface water network hidden below the ground, and the outfall from that pipe is a small orifice plate which is going to restrict the flow of water coming out of that rain garden. So as we get intense rainfall periods where we get high flow into those rain gardens, the flow that comes out of that orifice is only going to be so much, and it will back up into the rain garden, and the water will be stored in those gardens, and therefore that slows the rate at which that water is getting into our sewers. It also improves the water quality, so the runoff coming off those streets is going to have silts, pollutants, hydrocarbons, those kind of things, but instead of draining those straight through gullies, which then go straight into the sewer network, running it through the rain gardens, the soil will pick up and clean out a lot of that pollutants, and obviously it can benefit the planting within those rain gardens as well. And finally, we're also allowing infiltration to ground on these rain gardens. So a lot of our city centres are very hard paved areas where water doesn't infiltrate. And so these rain gardens are going to infiltrate at the base to ground. And what that means is that in smaller rainfall events, there will be very little, if any, rainwater actually makes its way into the sewer, because it will either be absorbed by the soil in the rain garden or it will infiltrate into the substrata below. You'll also have seen one of the main events of Armada Way is the real water feature. This is sort of incorporated into the overall SUD strategy by improving amenity space and biodiversity as well, but also it is fed by rainwater. So there's 3 existing tanks within Armada Way, and rather than sort of see them as a redundant feature of a bygone water feature that no longer is part of this scheme, we have incorporated it into the drainage strategy. These tanks will attenuate surface water, hold it in there, and then with a series of new pumps, they will provide water that feeds the rill and the irrigation system, which is going to keep those new trees flourishing. So finally, just a few keys to what I feel are keys to successful delivery of SUDs. You want to be considering it early within the design. It's a lot easier if we start with the design and work forward with sustainable drainage in mind. It is doable retrofitting SUDs into a design, but it's a lot easier if you start at the top and then work together to really sort of push that sort of philosophy forward. This is probably my biggest point. I think it's close collaboration. It's the best way to achieve a successful SUD scheme. Rather than having engineers and architects and urban designers working in silos and, you send us your drawing, we'll do our design and send it back to you. Working together, that's what we've achieved on Armada Way and also with Old Town Street and New George Street here. These rain gardens, it was working with the designers to create a scheme that was integrated into the design so that it feels more part of the public realm. As I say, incorporated into the streetscape. It's a bit of a thankless job because, you're going to look at those gardens and think, they look nice, but I know they're rain gardens. And so I've got that little bit of pride knowing that they're doing something more than just providing a bit of planting and some trees. But the general public may not even notice that, but that's where education about SUDs in public realm is needed. But I think if we can incorporate them into the streetscape and really make them embedded in the design, it's almost like they're hiding in plain sight. And finally, we want to be designing with the user in mind. That's just obviously a general mantra for public realm, but obviously choosing the appropriate SUDS systems for the site that you're working on and the way that the site is going to be used. There's a few documents here, a few useful guides that you might find interesting that I've referred to as well, basically covering SUDS in public realm and urban environments. SUDS is obviously very commonplace amongst planning developments and private developments, but it is becoming more and more of a focus in public realm design, and that's a good thing. So these documents are sort of leading the way on that, and Plymouth City Council is part of the Water Resilient Cities as well. Yes, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to chatting with you later on. Thanks very much.